The Supreme Court announced it will take up a case in the fall that considers the legality of Mississippi's ban on most abortions after 15 weeks of pregnancy. This case directly challenges Roe versus Wade and will give the anti-choice supermajority on the court the ability to overturn Roe. Reproductive justice advocates have been warning and preparing for just such an occurrence. Here to talk about what's transpired, what is at stake, Heidi Sieck, co-founder and chief empowerment officer of VOTEPROCHOICE, the national political engagement platform connecting pro-choice voters with pro-choice champions in critical elections. Heidi, thank you so much for joining us today.
I'm happy to be here with you, but I'm not necessarily happy to be talking about this.
Can you talk about the case that the Supreme Court has agreed to hear and how it directly challenges Roe v. Wade?
Yes, of course. First of all, I want to make sure that we start this conversation by talking to your viewers and your audience that sometimes when folks hear the issue of abortion or reproductive rights, they will think this is a women's issue, it doesn't apply to me. So I want to make sure that folks, everyone is clear that this applies to you. The situation we're about to talk about applies to you. This is about freedom. It's about control. It's about the decisions for how or when you're going to have or build a family and the conditions in which you will raise your children, if you choose to. And so this is impactful for everyone. So please listen, because we need you all to take action and we need you all to engage. So this week, the Supreme Court did decide to hear a case in their fall session that would consider the Mississippi 15-week abortion ban. This is a very big deal. Why is this a big deal? So Roe v. Wade was decided in 1973, which gave a federal protection for the access to abortion up to what's called viability or the third trimester. So that prevented states from limiting any kind of restrictions on abortion around 26-ish weeks, something like that. And that has been the case. That's the bottom line access, that you can get an abortion in the United States of America is legal up until viability or if you're third trimester. In 1992, there was a decision called Casey versus Planned Parenthood that protected that access, but also allowed for the states to create some restrictions around it that don't create an undue burden. So that's where we started to see the different limits and the there were these these laws called trap laws that were governing clinics that were restricting access to certain types of abortion. It did in some cases cause clinics to close, and it's really reduced the access across the country. And now at this point, we have about 56% of the country lives in a place that's hostile to reproductive freedom. And so over the course of the last 30 years, and more importantly, in the last 5 years, there have been more and more restrictions on abortion that have really been focused not only on restricting access, but going directly at the constitutionality of Roe versus Wade. And even in the last year, there have been more and more pieces of legislation that are looking to be going directly toward the heart of Roe. Why? Because in the Trump administration, 3 out of 10 active federal judges were confirmed by President Trump, and they are conservative, they are anti-choice. And so the more cases that actually get to the Supreme Court or get to the federal court provides another opportunity for the Supreme Court to overturn and limit Roe versus Wade. So this case is one of about 18 that were in the federal judicial system that the Supreme Court could select. And at the last week of this session, they decided that they were gonna consider this. This is it's called Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health. It's considering a piece of Mississippi state legislation that limits abortion at after 15 weeks, that prohibits abortion after 15 weeks. It is unconstitutional on its face. In fact, when the governor of Mississippi signed the bill, he said something like, I know I'm going to get sued in the next 30 minutes, but it's worth it for the fight. Meaning he knew that this bill was going to go to the Supreme Court and give the Supreme Court an opportunity to overturn Roe. And the reason why this is happening is because now the Supreme Court has 6 anti-choice conservative justices on it, 2 that were basically stolen, 2 spots that were stolen, 1 that was Brett Kavanaugh, the other Amy Coney Barrett, that were passed they were stolen seats. They were hijacked seats by the U.S. Senate. 1 was blocking Obama's nomination of Merrick Garland, and the other was confirming Ruth Bader Ginsburg's replacement 9 days before an election. So we've got a real situation now where this case is going straight at the heart of Roe. So long explanation, but hopefully that provides some context.
No, it's really helpful to have the context and the map there of where we are coming from. Is there something specific about this particular case that you believe caused the Supreme Court to agree to hear it?
That's an interesting question, because this case was actually considered for about 20 weeks. It would come up every week. And at first we were like, okay, the justices aren't going to decide to take it up. Like, somebody's choosing not to do this. But then suddenly this week they decided. So we're not entirely sure what changed and why the justices are going for this, except for the most bone-chilling issue that's in the decision and what the justices will be considering, which is, and I quote, whether all pre-viability prohibitions on elective abortions are unconstitutional. So what that means is, like, the only reason to consider this case is to overturn Roe. Federal courts across the board and all lower courts understand that Roe v. Wade provides a constitutional right to privacy and a constitutional right to abortion pre-viability. And so what this case is doing is saying, who cares about the precedent? We actually want to reflect upon whether Roe v. Wade is still something that we want to keep. That this conservative 6 justices really do want to consider whether they want to allow the states to enact abortion restrictions pre-viability, meaning 15-week bans, 6-week bans that are pre-viability could be enacted by the state legislatures. So this is a very active case, and it's a perspective that's changed because of the justices on the court. Sorry about that.
If this were to come to pass and Roe were overturned, it would go to the states to individually decide what they feel is appropriate about abortion in their jurisdictions?
Yes, that's right. Well, to some extent, we don't know exactly what the perspective is or the limits that this particular case could give, but we know, because this is about the Mississippi 15-week abortion ban, it's likely to be 15 weeks or less. So this is allowing states to limit abortion at 15 weeks. Or it could be a blanket overturn of Roe. We're not entirely sure. But we do know that current situation in the states is in 2021, we've had total bans have been passed by Arkansas, Idaho, Oklahoma, South Carolina. There's been additional pieces of legislation in Kentucky, Ohio, Kansas. In fact, this year, we need to really get what's happening here. This year, 2021, is on track to be the most restrictive year for abortion rights since Roe was passed. There's been 61 restrictions passed in 13 states just this year. And it's already exceeding the most restrictive year, which was 10 years ago. So to also put it in context, it's like accelerating even more now, because between April 26th and April 29th, 28 restrictions were signed into law. So basically, the state legislatures and the lower courts are really providing a menu of potential restrictions and opportunities for control to the Supreme Court, and they could be reflecting on any of these things. So yes, it basically will go to the states, but existing state law is already there to restrict access immediately. So when this case is heard and decided, likely by next June of 2022, it means that trigger bans in the 10 states across the country will go into effect. It means any of these pieces of legislation that are already in place that would be aligned with the new law would go into effect. It means that like restriction is immediate and imminent upon us. So it's definitely something that we need to pay attention to right away.
Given the court's anti-abortion supermajority, is there any reason to believe this case will not end up overturning Roe?
No, I really do think that there is a almost guarantee that there will be restrictions. There is no other reason to hear this case. Roe v. Wade sets a precedent, a right to privacy and protection of abortion. Casey also sets a precedent, which is access to abortion with certain restrictions that states can decide. Now, that's already plenty and also has created a situation where it's made access very difficult in some states. There is no reason to hear this case except these justices want to provide further restriction. So I think we all have to be honest about that and what we're actually facing.
Can you talk about the right to privacy and what impact losing the right to privacy would have?
Well, I mean, the right to privacy was definitely, it was pulled out. It isn't actually exactly in the Constitution as such, but it is definitely an aspect of the Roe v. Wade decision that that was based on. And so it also is connected to our access to birth control, what happens within our marriages and our intimate relationships. And the impact of the loss of the right to privacy could definitely have large-scale impact upon those kinds of communications, interactions, but it might also have reverberation across all other aspects of life. Hard to say. So we have to be very mindful of the concept of what we're losing here and how it may impact all aspects of our life. So we should be very, very scared. We should be very
concerned. Into the next question. I mean, sometimes for people, this is a theory. Yes, women should have the right, etc. Can you talk about the specific impacts this will have on women's lives and on America in general?
This is the most important thing that I want everyone to realize. This is not just an impact on women's lives, it's an impact on everyone's life. So, first of all, technically, these bans and these pieces of legislation have in them legal penalties or criminal penalties. So there's a bunch of different aspects to it. But so, for example, in Arkansas, it's a felony with a major fine, like $100,000 fine. It is not clear whether it's just for the medical professional that performs an abortion that would be charged with a felony. There's lack of clarity whether a self-induction of an abortion or a miscarriage would cause the person that's inducing a miscarriage to be thrown in jail. So this is truly including criminal penalties and criminal investigation into the most personal decisions that we're making about our lives and our families. So we really do have to ask ourselves, do we want sheriff's deputies and police officers to be entering the hospital every time there's a miscarriage reported? That's what we're looking at here. The basic fundamental issue here is people are going to go to jail for exercising body autonomy. And there are going to be felony charges. And already in Indiana and other states, there are women who have served time for taking body autonomy into their own hands. And so it will be widespread. Now, that's the technical and horrifying truth about some of these laws. But more existentially, we really have to understand that reproductive freedom is a foundational issue of our ability to be free and to have autonomy and decisions in our lives. That it's not just a woman's decision about whether she wants to have a child or build a family. It's about whether she or they want to go to school, or what kind of job they have, or how they want to save money, or 2/3 of the people that seek abortion are already mothers. So this is a parenting decision. This is a decision about access and resources. And particularly, we know in the pandemic, the challenges, the economic challenges and the childcare challenges, and just the difficulty it has been for families. We know that in a lot of cases, it's very difficult to be able to raise children and make sure that folks are healthy and they can, and all of those aspects, the systemic aspects of life. You need to have autonomy over how you are going to build or raise or grow your family, period. And if we have these kinds of limitations, you won't be able to do that.
This is really very, very disturbing. Will President Biden have time to expand the court by the time? Is there any possibility we could get, 2 more sane people on that court?
A theory, but we know that there's a lot of political challenges ahead of him and a lot of federal legislation that he needs to prioritize or focus on. So expanding the court is an important conversation to have and to explore, but it's not the solution to our problems right now. It's not going to fix all the pieces of state legislation that are out there already. This has been an investment over 40 years of an overly funded anti-choice minority infrastructure that's been looking at chipping away at access to abortion since Roe v. Wade was passed. This is a political strategy that's used to mobilize a small segment of the anti-choice conservative movement to make sure that they stay connected to the Republican Party and are voting for leaders like Donald Trump, Mitch McConnell, Josh Hawley, Marjorie Taylor Greene. It is essential for all of the Republican leaders to keep those that anti-choice faction activated. And so therefore, that investment over 30, 40 years has rendered us into this situation now where we have all of that leadership investment has brought us this anti-choice Supreme Court. So honestly, instead of thinking about expanding the court in this short of time, which we should definitely explore, the most important thing we need to be doing is looking at our elected officials across the board and to understand particularly state and local elected officials in all aspects where they stand on reproductive freedom, because that's where these laws are coming from. We're talking about state legislatures, governors, attorneys general, and more importantly now, and this is a true call to action, which I know you'll ask me in a minute, but I'm very passionate about this. When you look at the lay of the land now in the country, you realize that these horrific, controlling, restrictive laws are going to be enforced by people like anti-choice sheriffs and anti-choice district attorneys and anti-choice judges who are elected. So it is imperative and essential that we are identifying and recruiting and supporting people who are running for these offices who are vehemently pro-choice and will protect access to these essential medical services. So pro-choice sheriffs, pro-choice coroners, pro-choice district attorneys, pro-choice public defenders. It is absolutely critical that we look at that as the strategy. Yes, we need to explore the expansion of the Supreme Court, but in a way that's the end game. That is the end of the line for where all of this has gone. Now we have to look at the foundational, the root, which are these elected officials who are making policies and enforcing policies. So that's what I hope people take away as the solution to this problem.
We often, when we've had conversations before, you often give the numbers and you talk about that the U.S. is a pro-choice nation. It seems a very well played hand by those who are anti-choice to have gotten this far. What's the number? 72%, 78%?
Yeah, it's 72% of people in America believe that we should have access to abortion that's safe, legal, accessible, affordable, and without shame. But even more so, over 80% of people do not want Roe v. Wade overturned. They do believe there should be some access to reproductive freedom, abortion. They have some support. They get it. People get it. Republicans, Democrats, independents understand that when you are in your doctor's office making a decision about the future trajectory of your life, you want to be able to make that decision. We all want to be able to have autonomy over our future, and that you don't want a sheriff's deputy standing there making that decision for you. People get that. So we're talking about the tiny little group. It was a brilliant political strategy on behalf of the anti-choice infrastructure to keep this 18% of anti-choice faction activated and organized. It's definitely a case study in excellent long-term political strategy and leadership development that I continue to be in awe of and continue to study for my own education and how to be an organizer, because it is long-term investment at the early stages. It's in schools, it's in law schools, it's recruiting school board members, it's developing early pipelines of elected leaders at the local and state level that have got us to this point where Roe is being overturned. Now, the anti-choice movement has been investing in these kinds of infrastructure. Unfortunately, the progressive democratic reproductive rights movement has not. It has not been answering that investment. And so that's what we see now, that we have this totally imbalanced reality of state legislatures who've supported gerrymandering, the very conservative judicial appointments that are not reflective of our country. And now it's time for us to really motivate ourselves and push back.
You know, as we move into what's going to be very contentious coverage of the case, it seems that Fox News is going to just say, well, it's states' rights. If you want an abortion, you can go to New York, or states should have the right to, I guess, oppress their people who live in their jurisdiction. Mm-hmm. What would be the response to that kind of argument?
Well, fundamentally here, what we are talking about is that the political infrastructure of states' rights is organized in a way that does not reflect the will of the people. So that is a argument that doesn't work on its face, because also this investment has created that imbalance of infrastructure. We see it with, particularly, like I was saying before, the gerrymandering, and which means the drawing of lines of congressional districts, which provides basically conservative and Republican districts are not actually reflective of the will of the people. There are too many conservative House of Representatives members, too many conservative state legislators, because their districts are drawn in order to get them elected. Mm. It's not reflective of the will of the people. So saying that it is states' rights is technically true through the Constitution, but it's not existentially true around the will of the people. So we actually can do pieces of legislation, federal legislation, that should be passed, like the Women's Health Act, that should be passed by Congress, that will codify aspects of Roe v. Wade into federal law, that will help protect these things. This must be a priority of the Biden administration, and it must be the priority of this Congress to be able to help. It also must be the priority for all of us to really focus on our state legislative races to make sure that we're electing those pro-choice candidates in those elections. So, you know, we've got quite a fight on our hands.
I'm glad you brought that up. The fact that there are things we can do, including vote in these upcoming elections, and there's upcoming primaries. So keep your eyes on that and vote in accordance with pro-choice values. Vote pro-choice. You guys put out voter information.
Yes. Vote Pro-Choice was founded 5 years ago in 2016 for this exact purpose, to be able to focus attention upon those down ballot races, state legislative races, and local races through the lens of reproductive freedom. I've been in this movement for 40 years. I've seen all of the chipping away and the pieces of legislation that's happened. None of this is surprising to me. It's shocking, but it's not surprising, because it's been happening over time. And so the solution truly is to pay attention to all of the local and state races. In 2021, there are over 40,000 races on the ballot. There are state legislative races in New Jersey and Virginia, and thousands of mayors and city councils and school boards and all sorts of elected offices that are going to be up in 2021. So we have to be focused on those. That's what we do at Vote Pro-Choice. We make sure that you have a comprehensive voter information, a comprehensive voter guide that allows you to know what the heck is going on all the way down your ballot, and to be able to choose the best candidates that will protect reproductive freedom. Because here's the issue. Reproductive freedom is an expansive conceptual policy that is foundational for everything. It's healthcare, it's economic justice, it's racial justice, it's criminal justice reform, it's climate justice. It's all aspects are included through the lens of reproductive freedom, because we want to make sure that we have healthy families and that we have health, we ourselves are healthy. So our voter guide really does provide information through that lens. And we'll have one ready for you in 2021.
Oh, great. We're looking forward to that next one coming out. Anything else our elected officials could do to mitigate against the effects of what might be coming down the pipe from the Supreme Court?
I'm glad you asked that. Every single elected official can impact reproductive freedom, can protect reproductive freedom. If you're a federal elected official, it's please pass federal legislation that codifies all aspects of Roe v. Wade, that includes all aspects of reproductive health and insurance and healthcare plans. We need it all. We need it all protected at the federal level. State legislative candidates can do the same, protecting reproductive freedom and access. Additionally, even if you're a mayor or a city council person, you can expand access to healthcare and reproductive healthcare in your city policies, in insurance policies. You can protect health clinics from protesters. You can create all sorts of protections that allow more access. And school boards can pass more comprehensive sex ed, provide more access to birth control in your schools. There's a million and one ways, and every single elected office has an option to protect reproductive freedom. Vote Pro-Choice does have a report called the Local Impact Report that lists all the different policies that an elected official can consider. So no matter what you are doing, no matter what you are elected to, you have a role in protecting reproductive freedom and making this situation better.
Heidi Sieck, thank you so much for joining us. Heidi Sieck, co-founder and chief empowerment officer of Vote Pro-Choice, which you can find hashtag Vote Pro-Choice across social media platforms. Thank you so much for joining us. Obviously, we're going to need to have you back as this situation unfolds and people can figure out what they can do to be useful.
Yes, please sign up for Vote Pro-Choice and make sure you know your local elected and state officials and you go and vote, because the front line of the battle is at the ballot box now.
You're watching ACT TV. Thanks for watching.